So I'm an old trucker, right? In lots of ways, every sense of that word. I am an old trucker. So death before dismount, right? Bit of a mantra. I don't get out of my rig. On those bad days when I got to get out, I dismount, chin strap buckled, weapon at the high ready, 05s, 15s conducted. I assume my sector of fire and I am ready for the fight, right? I'm not looking for it, but I am
You're ready
ready.
for it.
You're ready because the bad guy watches. He is deliberate about target selection, right? He's intentional. He probes, he rehearses. And when I don't dismount that way and you don't, or someone in our convoy or our patrol doesn't, what we have done is we have just made that route less safe. Not just for people rolling with our bumper number, but for everybody running up and down that route, right?
Posturing.
Right? And so when we message the adversary, hey, we are ready for this fight, it's the same thing, right? We don't need a silver bullet. This absolutely is not a silver bullet, but we don't need one because in my unit, if we message, we're ready for this fight, we are prepared to respond, right? That gets him out of our AO. And then when my sister unit does that, and our sister battalions and brigades and MACOMs and states, right? Over time, we're going to reduce the hunting ground within the DoD. And you combine that with the incremental changes we make and how people think about this threat and the destigmatization of the conversations, it's going to make a difference in readiness. And I tell you what, these are loads that nobody should be carrying in their pack alone if that's not what they want to do.
Good afternoon, I'm Captain Carney and welcome back to Leaders Recon. Today we're discussing the Buddy Aid program with Major Bridget Flannery. Ma'am, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
What's your major background, the highlights of your military experience?
Okay, I'm a military intelligence officer out of South Dakota. And I'm currently stationed at the Professional Education Center working this effort for PEC and Guard Bureau. Had a big old break in service. All my enlisted time was an 88 mic. Put a little plug in for the 4Ds out of South Dakota, my peeps. I had a very brief stint in public affairs. So really, and it was during that stint where doctrinally PA finally got recognized as a non-kinetic effort. And grew to appreciate the kind of work that you do, right, at a different level. But that's the entirety of my experience. It's trucking and intelligence, and that with that one little break with public affairs.
And so I was looking through your bio, and on the civilian side, I would assume you have your CDL because you were a truck driver?
Oh, that was all military.
Oh, it was all military?
Yeah, no CDL.
Okay. Do you have a full, like a civilian career pathway that you've gone through?
Do. Yeah, so, coming home from my first tour, that had interrupted college, and I went to work for Citigroup. And that ended up being a big part of my career. So I was in and around training and human resources for a total of about 15 years with Citicorps. That was broken up with a tour at a little community college, a technical institute in South Dakota. So all of my experience on the civilian side, and I've been an M-Day soldier prior to this work, my whole career, except when Uncle Sam needed us. And it was all around training and human resources. And so working in the training field has been my life's work.
That's pretty interesting. I did MI and now I'm doing training stuff. And so it's interesting to get a breath of fresh air and get out of the skiff and come do like operations side. So Buddy Aid.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that is, an overview?
Yeah. Okay, so Buddy Aid, the content, the nuts and bolts is this. It teaches first response to sexual assault. And there's 5 pillars. If someone has been hurt, what do you say? What do you not say? What do you do? And what do you not do, right? And then the 5th pillar is, what if no one's told you jack, but you suspect? How do you engage then? So 10 level on the Army side, 3 level on the air side is just basic. Basic first response. It's CPR. It's putting on the tourniquet. That's
So,
what buddy aid is.
okay. So, what sort of solution or resource is produced by the program? Like, there are some courses that are taught. What is the end product of the course?
Well, in the course, we use the tourniquet as a metaphor, right? Um, if I back up from that a hot minute, so I'm an intelligence officer by trade, and we work. I supported logisticians when I was downrange as an intel officer. We work firmly in the fat part of the bell-shaped curve, right? Most likely. There's never enough assets. There's never enough resources to cover people from fob to fob, right? So where are they most likely to hit and how? And then you get to the left of that as best you can, and you prepare as best you can, knowing that the bad guy gets a vote, right? CONUS, OCONUS, from a global perspective, not a combat centric perspective, the most likely threat that we face to readiness, hell and gone, it's not even close, is sexual assault, right? So what we get out of teaching people how do you respond to that is we get a more focused fighting force, right? We start to remove distractors from training. The CDC tells us that 1 in 3 women in this country will be victims of sexual assault in their life, and 1 in 4 men will be. 1 in 5 American women are raped in their lifetime. I'm not a mathematician, but when you think about the percent of our force that is likely to be impacted by that trauma, and then you extrapolate from that, maybe it didn't happen to me, but it happened to my brother, my husband, or my daughter, right? And when we talk to classes, trauma is trauma, right? The neurobiological response to trauma is the same. The neurobiological response to vicarious trauma is the same. And all of it, if I'm your driver, dude, you don't want me distracted with that, right? You want me focused and in the game. So that's globally what we get. On the very short term, what we get is people walking out of an hour and a half of training, and they've got tools that they can not only use while wearing boots, but they can take home to their families, their employers.
It's not just a military skill.
No.
It's for everybody because it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
So as I was looking through some of the pre-reading stuff, it seemed like some of the things that you would try to target are sort of the bystander effect, and you're trying to mitigate that and trying to turn soldiers into culture change agents. Is that part of the course or the curriculum much, or?
Yeah. I've got 2 answers to that, right? If you were in class, or you were in command, or I'm sitting in an ATAG or a TAG's office, the answer to that is I don't give 2 anythings about culture change, right? This is first response to the most likely threat that your men and women are going to face. Can they and will they, right? It's like the tourniquet. Do I care about culture change? Dude, I need that tourniquet. I care that you can put it on, that you will put it on, and you're going to get my happy ass home to Tali and my kids, right? And that's the posture with sexual assault.
It's immediate actions on.
Yeah, that's one answer. The other answer is what we know about buddy aid is that when you approach this topic, which is a really hard topic, right? No one gets up in the morning and says, I get to go to sexual assault first response training.
I know we all love sharp training every year.
I know,
so
right?
You have to put a different perspective on it.
What we know is that when you meet soldiers and airmen where they're at, you just talk to them like warriors, right? This is a 10 level, a 3-level skill. It's the most likely threat you're going to face. The bad guy's good at his job and he gets a vote, right? When you approach professional warriors like that, they meet you there. And so a happy second order consequence, we do get attitude change out of that hour and a half. We see people shift in how they think about the level of threat, how they think about who can be victimized, how they think about their own experiences. So is it our goal? Hell no. And if you ask me that in class, hell no in all caps, right? And it's part of the outcome. Another part of the outcome is that it destigmatizes the conversation, right? So you start to use language that is consistent with other threats, and you give men and women of all ranks, right? You give them language to talk about this incredibly challenging and personal topic, and it makes it okay.
Makes it real, makes it attainable to speak about and safe.
I tell you what, I don't like to think about, putting a tourniquet on my best friend either. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of that could be me. I don't like the idea of my hands slippery with his blood.
Sure.
Right? None of this is happening. We are trained to do hard things. This is just another one of those hard things that we globally, not you and me, but we haven't approached it that way, right?
Sure.
So this is a new approach for sexual assault, and at the same time, it's not new at all. This is the same approach we take with other things that are part and parcel of being citizens and defending this country.
Yes, ma'am. Can you tell me what the classes are like? How often are you teaching them? You said they're an hour and a half. Yeah. How many people do you get in a class? Where do you teach them?
So the 10 level, the 3 level, that's the hour and a half course. And we, soldiers, I had my last data cut in July. And as of then, we're in 33 states and territories and districts.
Congratulations.
Yeah, right. It's awesome, and thank you. And it's a super good thing for the men and women in those states and territories in the district. So 33 states, a couple of them, a smaller handful, are really leaning into it in that they have more trainers on the ground. So, the data that we pull from is not equally distributed from those 33, but lots of exposure. As of July, we had men and women from 14 states, Army and Air, prepared to train buddy aid, and that's a 4.5-day course. And we do that this year. It's centered out of Peck, but we're in transition year to bring that up to Guard Bureau. 14 states, I think I mentioned that. We've got men and women, and that is a 4.5-day course. So that you walk out of that course with the skills, not just about buddy aid, but about the neurobiology of trauma, right? And how do you have those conversations in a trauma-informed way? How do you look for indicators? And then seeing the indicators, how do you do that? And how do you do all that while you are briefing, right? While you're training. The 4.5-day course is capped at 15 packs, so we can do up to 15 at a time. And the 1.5-hour version, we cap at 25. And if you think of it like counter IED, right? You wouldn't put a whole company of trucks through the lane at once. Same thing. You're going to water down the value, and people aren't going to get the learning. So
too many distractions.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
People have other stuff going on, and so
yeah.
There was some terminology that I saw in some of the pre-reading. Buddy aid proper, T3. Oh, what are some of those?
Yeah, so the proper is just a 1.5-hour version.
Oh, okay.
When this was when this was in its infancy, right, in South Dakota, hey, Flan, would you come do that training?
Right.
When we came under the incubator, and we built the curriculum for the Train the Trainer, which is the 4.5-day course that prepares people to train buddy aid proper or level 1, that first line. That's where those terms came in. It was when we started to enter into the national.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going to the history of the course, started in South Dakota?
You know what? I used to say it started in Afghanistan.
Oh.
And inside of the last 6 months, I fixed myself. In retrospect, it really started in Fort Carson, Colorado in 1990.
Oh, wow. What's the story behind that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Just a little nice segue there. So.
So I was a 20-year-old, 21 maybe. I was a PFC, 88 Mike, and we had gotten called up on Veterans Day weekend for the Gulf War. And so we're sitting in Fort Carson, and the ports were backed up. Our fly date kept moving to the right till our trucks could get over there. And we, in those days, right, we trained buddy aid. That's where the name comes from. We trained buddy aid, but it was atropine in the thigh. Captain, do you remember that? Did you do this?
I did not know.
Okay. Well, it was a thing. And in my recollection, and I understand now what both age and trauma does to memory. But in my memory, we trained buddy aid every drill, right? And it was because nerve agent was the threat, right? This was still Cold War when I enlisted. So you get your nerve agent antidote in your thigh, and then there was needles, and you would fold the needles over your pocket. And in my recollection, we trained it all the time.
Sounds like our modern CLS training.
Well, no, because I tell you what, getting the atropine in your thigh, everybody knew how to do that. Oh. Yeah, so not quite CLS. Self-aid.
Okay.
Right? How do you get the tourniquet on yourself? More like that. Well, so we had trained this anyway, all the time, in my recollection. And then you get to Fort Carson, and Saddam, right? The George Bush Sr., he always intentionally mispronounced his name.
Was, Saddam
right?
Hussein?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a personal little Saddam.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Saddam was, promising to send us all home in oceans of blood. And I was scared out of my mind, right? And he had chemical weapons, right? So then we really trained with the atropine in the thigh, right? When you're fixing to go. And I remember the day that our supply sergeant drew our body bags. Not something that, there was nothing in my experience that had prepared me for that day. That was also about the time that we got trained in the casualty feeder card. Because who cares about the form, right? Get the atropine in my thigh. Okay. So flash forward, right? Big break in service, re-enlist, 2012. The battalion commander and the 3 and the sergeant major, we had gotten orders for Afghanistan, and I was their intel officer. And so we're down at, I think we were at Bliss getting the threat brief, right? Ahead of rolling. And the gentleman that was briefing us, it wasn't even on his slide, but he just mentioned the incidents of violent sexual assault. And then I always think of Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. Is there any other kind?
Oh,
yeah,
when
right?
he's on the stand.
Yeah. Violent sexual assault. What he meant was that there was violence comorbid with assaults, right? So it was occurring with it. And I was also I had to get credentialed for a SARC because it's a requirement, as when you're a battalion size element. I was the ranking advocate, right? So then Colonel Oster, the battalion commander, he kind of looks at me and I'm like, got it. And then, we went back to the brief, right? And we get home. We had a tremendous SARC at that time in South Dakota. Teresa Forbes was her name. And I worked with her, and we got, with the commander's support, full support, we got a bunch of additional advocates prepped and trained. Ms. Forbes built us scenarios. I had reached out to the SARC downrange so we could build those scenarios based on the nature of the violence that people were encountering. I was an intel officer, so we developed injects that we did at Moab Station as a battalion staff, which we failed in spectacular fashion, but at least we had done them, right? And so as the ranking advocate, we rolled out the door, and I really felt like we were ready. And we were not even done with our left seat, much less our left seat, right seat. And I knew that I was very wrong about that. And quoting General Party in South Dakota, I had a bifocalism, right? Because I was the intelligence officer and I was the ranking advocate. I was a battalion SARC. So I had this line of sight that was very particular. And I knew what we were doing to get to the left of what I now call the traditional kinetic threat. And we had incredibly high-speed men and women in our down trace, and they sure as hell knew what to do when things didn't, when things went poorly, right? And neither of those two things were true with sexual assault. And we were doing really very good by almost every measure against the traditional adversary, and we're getting our asses handed to us relative to sexual assault.
So I know that when you say to the left of the threat, like the left of bang, so
Right.
we're talking about high profile attacks, we're talking about explosives and all that
IEDs.
kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
whenever you say to the left of bang for the enemy, left of sexual assault, that's where this course comes in.
Well, yeah, hey, that's a fabulous question.
How do we get to the left of sexual assault?
Right. Okay, so we're in Afghanistan. There was no, it happened totally organically. There was no flip of the switch. And really, huge kudos to the NCOs that were in our down trace, because in hindsight, you know, as you Monday morning quarterback it, in a lot of ways, it was their skill that really set the stage for this work. So I had this bifocalism, right? Well, over time, throughout the course of that tour, we just started treating sexual assault the same way we treated IEDs and complex attacks. So it's those same tools, right? Including it in your PCCs, right? There was one moment where, again, the commander looked at me and his eyebrow was up and he's like, "Why haven't we been doing this?" And I was like, "Right, why haven't we been doing this?" A mission was about to roll out, and I can see him. I can see the mission commander. So everyone who was rolling was in the room, and he was briefing. Right now, it's the back brief time, and he briefed where in the convoy the medics were, and then he briefed where in the convoy his advocates were. It was moments like that, right? Well, we're on the way home, and Colonel Oster says to me, he says, "Flann," he said, "you can't let what we learned there stay there." So I built slides that look, except for the numbers changing, in large part how they look today. And I'm only an advocate, I took them to the military sexual trauma coordinators at the VA and the Vet Center. And I said, "What do you think?" And they said, "Pretty good." So we've been training it in South Dakota since 2014. Nothing programmatic, just, you know, like I said before, "Flann, will you come do this?" And then in 2009, well, okay, back up from that. Because there's lots of credit, right? This was all a lot of people doing their job really well, right? In 2017, I was doing work in a BSB, and then Major Rebecca Trigstad was the AO, and I'd served with her father in the first Gulf War. Yeah, right. And she's a very warm woman. She said, "Flann," she said, "if you die, this training dies with you." I go, "I need a tissue." Anyway, so she puts me on ADOS orders for a week. Now, you can't do jack with curriculum in a week, right? So, I mean, it was really rudimentary, but it was the beginnings of a train the trainer. And South Dakota was between SARCs at the time and an incredibly high-speed SARC on the air side, then Lieutenant Emily Rollison. She calls me and she said, "Hey, I'm putting together training. Will you come do that buddy aid thing?" And I said, "Yes," right? And so that was 2018. So that was when we tested that incredibly rudimentary train the trainer. And then the following year, Lana Christensen, another incredible high-speed SARC, she calls me and she says, "Hey, have you heard of the Warrior Resilience Fitness Innovation and Incubator?" And I said, "No." What the hell?
Right. Same way they probably hadn't heard of your program or something like that. There's a
No.
reciprocity.
Yeah, for sure. 2019 was the year the incubator was stood up. With her help and Emily's help, we submitted a packet, and Buddy Aid was one of their 11 inaugural projects that were chosen. And then Colonel Novice, the chief of SAPRO here, she funneled, financial support. So I came on orders full time in the fall of 2019, and with the help of a civilian advisory board with curriculum design specialists and military sexual trauma clinicians, we built the Train the Trainer, facilitated the first one in 2019. Got kicked out of the incubator's nest. We were also the first pilot to launch from incubator to national initiative, and that was under the leadership of Colonel Leland Blanchard, who was the commander at PEC at the time.
We know him well.
Yeah, right. And so he invited me to come down there to stand it up, and then he, since, as you know, went on to bigger and greener pastures. And Colonel Cherry now is the commander, and with the continued support of Colonel Novice and the nudging of General Little, and I'm given to understand his boss, right? We are now transitioning out of PEC and to Guard Bureau and into what I am understanding will be a program of record.
Okay.
And that is how we got here.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's always been effective since you implemented it back in 2012, or it's gone. Have you had any obstacles that you've had to overcome?
Well, hell yeah. I tell you what, if you'd asked me if what we were doing, I knew this worked in Afghanistan, 100%. I did not have data, right? And who gives a hot anything what Lieutenant Bridget Flannery thinks? I knew this approach worked. I saw what it did for the men and women in our downtrace. I saw what it did for victims, and that was reaffirmed every time we trained at CONUS, right?
So
when we got home.
The PCC, PCI that you were doing were to identify essentially key soldiers whenever you would go out on a mission.
It wasn't even that. I don't even think it was that well formulated, right? And my memory of it too is episodic. I remember that. I remember that mission commander. I remember sitting in the TOC working with a different mission commander, and we were working through hot spots, right, that they were going to encounter on the mission. And after we got done talking about the traditional adversary, then, okay, now where are we going to be at risk for rape, right? It was little things like that. There were no slides, there were no training. It was really just a mindset.
Just a different hat.
It was a different hat. And in fact, it's ironic that you say that, because people would, you're an intelligence officer, you got to talk. You want every soldier's a sensor, right? I wanted to see what they were seeing. I wanted to know what they were experiencing every mission, every time.
It's like a friendly climate.
Oh, for sure, right?
Friendly environment.
Yeah. It's coffee cup conversations. Emily Rollison dubbed them. I realized in theater, and we had our SPO, Jason Kimura, right? For the assets that I ran off the base, he'd hook me up with, jerky and muffins and, stuff that people don't get when you're working in some of those places. Because when you have food, people talk differently, right? Well, I'm from a small town in South Dakota.
When you break bread,
right?
Things change.
Right. It is. And I know now there's science that supports that. So when I'd talk to soldiers about their runs, whenever possible, I'd have monsters or coffee or, something to offer them. And it's true with sexual assault too, right? So we teach our facilitators, have a cup of coffee, have a can. I don't care what you have, but have something, right? Because people, it's a different feeling, right? Yeah, so a different hat. There was, when I was in the talk about those episodes, right? When did I know it was working? I was working in the TOC. We had men and women outside the wire, and someone came and got me. And it happened all the time because not everyone can get into the TOC, right? And so I geared up and I go outside, and there's a soldier, standing under the T-wall. And I have, at that moment, I'm in, intelligence officer mindset, right? Thinking they had information, huh? Sure. And what that soldier said to me was, I heard it was safe here. And, we had...
And not enemy safe, it was like... Right.
Yeah. We had in the neighborhood of 12 to 1,500 men and women in our downtrace over the course of that tour. I sure did not know all their faces, and I sure as hell did not know all their names. This soldier was not in our downtrace, right? And in that time and in that place, Joe and Jane talk, right? I knew it worked. It was things like that. I knew that what we were doing was working. I didn't have data until we became a pilot and we got hooked up with the Institute for Defense Analysis, specifically the significant talent of Ms. Ashley Williams at IDA. And so now, it's not just me and the other facilitators who say, hey, this works. The evidence supports that too.
So you were mentioning data earlier.
Yeah.
What sort of success stories or positive outcomes have you seen from what you've collected?
Yeah. So, um, I'm going to do a tip of the hat and a huge kudos to the state of Wyoming. Um, in our first Train the Trainer, that December of 2019, the SARC then, and I believe she's officially retired now, but Master Sergeant Rebecca Motley, she is a force to be reckoned with. And she had filled really the ranks of that first Train the Trainer, first one ever, with men and women from Wyoming. And Wyoming and South Dakota border one another. They drove, it's 4.5 day training. They popped smoke at noon on Friday, drilled that weekend, and literally facilitated buddy aid the day after they got home, right? And she calls me. I can't remember, was it Sunday night or Monday? She calls me right after drill with, oh my gosh, right? Our EO, she said, is telling me that there's been an uptick in reports of sexual harassment. What's going on? And so
We think it's a bad thing,
oh my gosh.
but being able to speak about it, that's the good part.
Well, yes, right? We being able to speak about it is good, right? Because if we don't talk about sexual assault, if we don't talk about those wounds, let's talk about something that's easier, right? If I've got a broken arm, me not talking about it doesn't do anything.
It's not going to fix it. Right?
It doesn't fix
You go
jack,
see the doctor.
right? So I call it the Heisman. Let's just avoid it. That
Right.
doesn't work. It doesn't.
It's not as tangible of a topic.
Yeah. Well, we want to think it's not.
Oh.
We want to think it's not, right? And we haven't trained one another to identify. So
it's certainly less obvious.
Right. It's less obvious when you don't have the training. When you have the training, it's like the yellow Volkswagens, then it's all over. Captain, you come to my 4.5 day class.
Part of the left of bang.
It's part of the left of the bang, for sure. For sure. And the beauty of it is, and now I'm going off topic, but trauma is trauma is trauma. So once I understand even basics, and hey, I'm just a first responder, right? That's all. But once you have the basics of the neurobiology of trauma, it doesn't matter if your trauma is from sexual assault, or if your trauma is from, a firefight, or an IED, or your spouse left you, or your kids getting beat up, or you're in financial trouble.
Sure.
Or these are all things that our facilitators navigate people through following buddy aid, because first response to trauma is first response to trauma, right? And so it speaks to people. These skills apply beyond the parameters of sexual assault. Also an unintended but very happy second order consequence.
Absolutely. So sorry, the
data.
The SARC was, she called you, they had gone up, the reports had gone up.
Yeah, and thank you for that. So you'd asked about the data, and I took us back to Wyoming. So they trained it right away. And that's not a scientific sample at that point, right? But what we saw at that point has been replicated over and over and over again. The data's been consistent since almost literally day one, since we've been gathering data. So some of the changes, first of all, after an hour and a half of training, most participants, it's in the neighborhood of 65%, walk out of the room, and if someone tells them, I've been hurt this way, they know what to say, and they can prove it. This is what I would say, and it's a trauma-informed response, right? So, and we do pre and post surveys. Ashley has helped me develop these so that they're scientifically valid and empirically sound, and I take all my directions from her tower. So 65%, right, after an hour and a half. Almost 100% say, I will use these skills in my civilian world. And we're a force that is 80% traditional, 80% MDay. This is built for first response. And particularly now in where resources are constrained and numbers are down, this is going to make a difference in retention. Because when we give our professional men and women skills that translate to the civilian side over
Money.
time, right? It's money.
Right.
And most of us, we don't wear this 28 days of the month. We're doing something else. So we're truly developing citizen soldiers that are going to be difference makers towards a very likely event that
The
they'll
citizen
face.
soldier concept.
And with their families. And I tell you what, the public narrative, we're providing, this line of effort is providing tools so that recruiters can, with confidence, look guardians and mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers in the eye and say, listen, we don't have the best track record and we are doing better, right? It's going to make a difference.
Right.
With the public narrative, and it's going to help recruiting.
Showing results.
Yeah, right. I mean, we know, and very senior people acknowledge openly that the fear of sexual assault is one of the barriers to recruitment.
So if you don't mind,
yeah,
with all of the fear and, the not being an obvious tangible, well, it is tangible, but it's not as obvious. So it's not often spoke of because it is so uncomfortable. Have you found or uncovered or unraveled any myths and exposed any facts around buddy aid training?
Right. So specific to, back to the data, that was very skillfully done, Captain. Okay. So specifically, there's a misperception that this is a chick problem, that this is a it's a female problem. This is, when you spend, 28 days of the month outside of boots, that also, we're just a subset of the culture. Right? This is not a problem that's specific to DoD, for sure. And so our thinking is absolutely not specific to DoD. We're just a subset of the larger population. And there's still a persistent stereotype that this is a female problem. And that is, we are missing the fat part of the target. We're 80% male-ish. And when we think about 1 in 4 men in this country are victims of sexual assault, and we are not hitting that center mass. We have way more walking wounded wearing boots that are men, and we do not talk honestly about that, and we haven't been talking about it in a language that they can hear.
Sure.
So one of the myths that we knock down is that this is a girl problem.
Sure.
And we see statistically significant differences in how people think about that in our training. Alcohol is the adversary's preferred weapon. And we get statistically significant differences in how people think about alcohol. I speak on behalf of nobody. Alcohol is a bit of the fabric of the military, in my experience. And when you combine that, the bad guy's very good at his job and he knows that. It's true in DoD and it's true outside of DoD. Alcohol is present, either perpetrator or victim or both at the time of assault, and that's by design. So one of the other myths we knock down is that, hey, if I were drinking, if I had a few too many Busch Lights, and I like me some Busch Lights, that I am somehow responsible, right? Maybe I didn't ask for it,
Sure.
but ... We knock that one down. There's 2 others. Alcohol, female problem.
Which just by ratio, it's like 80% of the military. Are you kidding me? So
please, DoD, and this is not from this year's report, but in the prior years, DoD gave us a range, and it was in the neighborhood of 48 to 62% of the time. DoD said alcohol was present at the time of assault. And civilian agencies that study this threat laugh at Mother DoD, saying that is ridiculously low. It's persistently put in the 80th, 90th percentile.
wow.
And once you frame it up that way, when you frame it like it should be framed, right? The bad guy is good at his job. It is not, if I drink and I am assaulted, right, there's exactly one person responsible for the assault, and it's the perpetrator. And there is only one exception to that, and that's in the instance of gang rape. And then there's just more than one.
Right.
Right. And we can spend all day in the regs. We can spend all day, and nowhere does it say anything about well, unless you're looking really good in your Levi's, or unless you had too many bush lights while you're,
There's never you're asking for it.
right? And we are an organization that we run on orders. Right? Regs are our lefts and our rights, and we haven't. I'm not a reg girl, right? And I'll say at the same time, that is a place that we haven't spent enough time, because that's a language that soldiers and airmen can hear, right? It's just
What's in the reg?
What's in the reg, and the shit's too easy, right? Yeah. So that's some of the data, right? They know what to say. We are changing attitudes now. That's the operational approach. We don't tell people, oh, we're here to start culture change. We're here to change how you think.
Immediate resistance to that.
Right.
We're just here to spread information, have a good conversation, open the box.
Yeah, we approach it, we don't even tell people it's about sexual assault. We tell them this is about your most likely threat. And we get them around that corner first. We get them thinking about the most likely threat. And we start by talking about the traditional kinetic wounds and killed from the last war, right? And then, right, then it's the big reveal in the common vernacular, right? Hey, let's look at the numbers. Here's the most likely threat. And
it goes into readiness. It goes into,
it's not about victims. If we had a common task manual here, there's nowhere in that, when we look at first aid or we look at prevention, nowhere does it say you've got to be supportive, right? It says these are your steps. Do the steps. And that's the approach that we take with this. And it's easy to Monday morning quarterback it. I do know. I'm pretty sure that were it not for that experience in Fort Carson, right? Recognizing who cares about the form, right? Pretty sure that were it not for that experience in Afghanistan, where I had that bifocalism, I saw at the same time both threats and how differently we treated them, and the efficacy difference in our approaches. I'm pretty sure without those three things lining up, this wouldn't have been apparent to me either. Once it became apparent, it's like, how have we missed this?
Right.
Because we've really put all of the emphasis on the form, right? Now listen, I want the form filled out right. You're my driver, right? I want the form filled out right, because if I make it to the hospital ship, I want them to know, but you got to get me to the hospital ship first.
Right.
And we skip that step.
Like there's action, but there's administration, but you execute.
Yeah, right. And so buddy aid is that, right? Hey, they're along metaphorically, they're along the MSR. What are you going to do? That's what buddy aid gets you.
Okay. So I like how you're talking about the bifocalism. So you realize the importance of buddy aid, and that's what's prompted the significance of getting into it. If you wanted to spread awareness, and when people watch this program, they may gain interest.
Yeah.
What are their pathways? How does someone who's buddy aid trained work with the SARC? How do they get involved in the game? How do they get in the game?
Yeah, so if you're in a state where there are already buddy aid facilitators, right? If folks are listening to this and they're like, hey, my SARC talked about this, or my commander, or my tag, right? There's a lot of that too. You're just go through your chain, right? Talk to your chain of command and get that word up to your SARC would be a safe place. A couple of states it's worked through the CR2C line, but in most states it's the SARC. If folks are listening to this and they're like, I've never heard of buddy aid before, they can email me. They can go to the PEC website and under course catalog, search on buddy aid, and my email and phone number are there. We will have, as we come to scale nationally, there will be other avenues, but right now those are
supplemental guidance, STOW email distro kind of thing.
Yeah, the email distro right at this point is me, and I just brought on 2 ADOS people. So Specialist Gilbert.
Picking up steam.
Yeah, we're picking up. Yeah, I have 300% of staff as I had to last year. Right?
Wow,
Well,
that's incredible growth.
It was just, I know. Yeah. No, we are getting there, and Colonel Novice is bringing on staff in preparation for this becoming a program of record. Yeah, so we're getting there. But right now, go to the PEC website, search under the course catalog, search on buddy aid, and that'll get you my email. And if you're in a state, or this is sounding familiar, link up with your SART.
Absolutely.
Too easy.
And then, so in the future, where do you see Buddy A going as far as in the next 3 to 5 years? What are your objectives?
Well, I tell you what, I'm pretty gal darn low on the totem pole, right?
You program a record, that's pretty good.
No, that's pretty cool. Here's, so J1, right? So the J1 directed, and we have a new J1 who I haven't had the privilege of meeting yet. And my marching orders are this: you continue with mission until/unless told differently, right? So the direction I have is this: in the next 3 to 5 years, this will be a SAPRO initiative. So I work for many bosses, Colonel Cherry at PEC and Colonel Novice here. And this year is transition year from PEC to Guard Bureau SAPRO. And then we're working, there will always be, I believe, the direction was maintain a relationship with PEC and then the airside tech, right? So we're developing that this year. The 1.5 year horizon is to get these principles, these operational principles, into the rest of WRF. So our suicide prevention, our substance abuse, right? Trauma. So that's about a 1.5 year horizon. And then once the program is mature and we're beyond the place of, we've got curriculum that is polished, right, with all of the talent that Guard Bureau can bring to bear, then we move outside of Guard Bureau and onto DoD.
Okay. So speaking of talent, are there any individual, like particular soldiers, any skill sets you're looking for, or come one, come all?
Right.
For training.
I tell you what. So for the 1.5 hour, right, for buddy aid, everybody needs that. I tell you, if I had a magic wand,
that's part of basic training or something like that.
For sure. And even better is the way, in my estimation on the Guard side, is the way Wyoming is doing it. Because, we don't build heat maps with sexual assault. In my opinion, we should. We do not. But our initial entry training, that'd be a bit of a purple spot, right? So Wyoming, one of the things they're doing is they are warriors at their RSP before they go to basic. Right. So they go in eyes wide open and prepared to respond. And that becomes a deterrent. And Captain, back to your original question, how is this prevention? How is it left of? So I'm an old trucker, right? In lots of ways, every sense of that word. I am an old trucker. So death before dismount, right? Bit of a mantra. I don't get out of my rig. On those bad days, when I got to get out, I dismount, chin strap buckled, weapon at the high ready, 05s, 15s conducted. I assume my sector of fire and I am ready for the fight, right? I'm not looking for it, but I am ready.
You're ready for it.
You're ready. Because the bad guy watches. He is deliberate about target selection, right? He's intentional. He probes. He rehearses. And when I don't dismount that way and you don't, or someone in our convoy or our patrol doesn't, what we have done is we have just made that route less safe. Not just for people rolling with our bumper number, but for everybody running up and down that route.
Posturing.
Right? And so when we message the adversary, hey, we are ready for this fight, it's the same thing, right? We don't need a silver bullet. This absolutely is not a silver bullet, but we don't need one, because in my unit, if we message, we're ready for this fight, we are prepared to respond, right? That gets him out of our AO. And then when my sister unit does that, and our sister battalions and brigades and MACOMs and states, right? Over time, we're going to reduce the hunting ground within the DoD. And you combine that with the incremental changes we make and how people think about this threat and the destigmatization of the conversations, it's going to make a difference in readiness. And I tell you what, these are loads that nobody should be carrying in their pack alone if that's not what they want to do, right? I didn't know this then. When we were in Afghanistan, Colonel Oster was our battalion commander, and he would knife hand us, the answer is yes. Your answer to those men and women will be yes. And then you find out what the question is, right? It was very much a servant leader posture.
Absolutely.
Right? And what I know now is that the tourniquet, right? The tourniquet in sexual assault is control. The first responder's ability to yield control at the time of disclosure, that is the clinical link to outcome for victims of sexual violence. So that experience as an intelligence officer for the 152 in Afghanistan, the answer is yes. What's your question? That's the seed, isn't it, of yielding control, right? Hey, what do you need?
Right.
Let me find that out.
Enabling the fighter, the war fighter.
Right. And that's what Buddy Aid is, right? So, just in lots of ways, lots of dominoes lined up to make this training possible. Yeah, and you'd asked about the left of. That's how you get there, right? Is you message the bad guy, we're ready.
So that kind of makes me think of a story with Intel as far as whenever Intel makes a prediction about when a threat would happen,
Right.
and then if you amplify your readiness tactics and things like that, and improve your posture, and you become a hardened target,
Right.
and then the threat doesn't happen,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, Intel was wrong. It's like, well, we
Right.
actually thwarted the threat. So it sounds like that's what this course is teaching, is you always have to be at least thinking about becoming more heavily postured, a hardened target. Just be aware.
Yeah.
And so that would thwart a lot of the threats.
Right. For sure. Right. And we know some things too, right? In Intel, so this is, I have a line of windmills lined up that I'm going to chase. The next course, if given the opportunity, that really needs to be developed is that. What's the threat brief, right? We know when, we know where, we know who, we know the target. We have information. You would throw me up against the T-wall as your intelligence officer if I did not give you those kinds of specifics with the other adversary, and rightly so, right? And we should be making those same demands of sexual assault. It is beyond the pale to me that we do not arm our leaders with that information. So that becomes a next step, right? And then when we know that, now I have information that lets me and the people I'm responsible for stay safer too.
Better
right?
react.
Yeah.
Be prepared.
Right? For sure.
So, ma'am, if I wanted to encapsulate and put Buddy Aid in a walnut, I would say that Buddy Aid codifies the language that we're so used to, and it essentially operationalizes it so it's easier for more soldiers to understand. It increases our posture to fight and thwart sexual assault. Does that sound pretty good?
I think that sounds pretty darn good.
Okay.
And it does all of that in an hour and a half.
Excellent.
Yeah, not bad. I think that was really well put, and thank you. And what does that, right? That becomes the byproduct of just teaching people first response, right? That's all it is. That's everything clinically.
Nip it in the bud.
Right? All it is first response, and it gets you that posture, because then you just demonstrate that you're ready, and you do that not just on the squadron floor, right? Not just on the armory floor, but you do that in other places, and you let the adversary see we are ready somewhere else. You fight somewhere else.
Down to the soldier level.
Yeah. And airmen, right? It's joint training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, thank you so much for all of the information. And the last question that we have is, if you could go back 10 years and give yourself some advice, what would it be?
I'll be generous with 10 years, because 10 years would put me at a weird time place, right? Just right in that ramp up to Afghanistan. I tell you what, if I had a magic wand and I could have been doing things differently, both as a leader in boots and out of boots, I'd get rid of our buddy culture. I'd get rid of our wingman culture. The adversary loves that. Groups of three. travel in a flock that will keep us safe. If I if I had a sash that said Queen of NGB, that would be my first decree. Adversary never gets just me. They get me and my friends. Total, we are a package deal every time. That would help keep us safe. If I had that sash, I'd make sure that every time we go out and have beers, we have a guardian angel, right? Not a designated driver, because that person's shuttling me and my drunk friends, right? But a guardian angel whose only job is to stay sober and provide overwatch, because the bad guy knows when we're drinking, right?
Defenses go down when you're having a good time.
Well, for sure, right? Yeah, there's all kinds of things that come into play with why he has chosen that as his preferred weapon. And then, the other thing that it was much longer than 10 years ago, but it formed me as a professional at Citigroup, and has really informed every bit of teaching I've done since then, to include my military career. And one of my colleagues, one of my mentors at Citigroup, Deb Nelson, I was a young manager right after that first Gulf War, and in the boardroom, it did not matter what the problem was, in my recollection. It was always a training problem, right? If we had, regulatory violations, Flan, what are you teaching them in training? Too much early service turnover. What are you doing in training? Bad customer service surveys. Well, how are we training it? I was on a treadmill, and I was young and inexperienced, and I did not know what the hell I was doing. And I called my friend Deb. I'm like, I am dying. And so there were 3 buildings, right? And she was in the meetings too. She knew. She worked in building 1. I worked in building 3. She said, meet me on the cafeteria in building 2 and we'll talk. So we're having coffee, early 90s, beautiful sunny day, fall day in South Dakota. And she writes on a napkin, she writes these words. She writes hiring, and then she writes training, and then she writes managing, and then she wrote equals success. And she said to me, she said, Bridget, she said, would you agree that really all we do here at Citigroup is this? And she shows me the napkin. And she said, human resources, they have to identify what skills we need, the sort of person and the sort of qualifications needed, and then onboard them appropriately. You and your team, right, have to teach them our systems and the regulations and our expectations, right, and the culture. And then we have to coach them, and we have to provide appropriate incentives, and there have to be clear targets and ramifications when targets aren't met. She said, would you agree that this is really all we do? No. The world's largest financial institution, right? I mean, all kinds of financial products. I'm like, well, okay, Deb Nelson, gross oversimplification.
Yeah, she kissed it a little bit.
Right? Yeah, she kissed it a little. But yes, that is all we do. And she said, okay. She said, Flan, if that's the equation, she said, what's the mathematical symbol that goes between there? And what do you think young Bridget Flannery said?
Plus sign?
That's exactly what I said. And she said, you are wrong. She said, it's multiplication. She said, if any of those are a null set, you're going to get a null set. I tell you what, that was a game changer. I was a very young manager with very little experience, and we changed a few things that first year, and you'd have thought we had pixie dust. Our results were so instant and so spectacular. And she was right, and she was smart as hell, right? And so when I think about training, my experience with training within the Department of Defense, we've treated it like it's addition, and we think we can train it. Too many suicides? Let's have a stand down. Someone dies in a motorcycle accident, safety stand down, right? Problems at the border, safety stand down. We can't train this problem away. We can't. And so buddy aid, right? There is a selection process. And I have zero command authority. I can't make anybody do anything. But we recognize that not everyone can do this, and not everyone should do this. So we provide selection scaffolding. There is absolutely post-training scaffolding. There is observations, there is data so that we know, right? Because we can't train it away. Training won't fix this. If I could go back 10 years, I would be, I'm like a dog with a bone with applying that in my life, but I would be more diligent about it. And I'd be more insistent that we apply that same kind of thinking out, not just to, now buddy aid, but hey, are we sending the right person to MRT training? Are we sending the right people to assist? Are we giving them any scaffolding afterwards? Are we holding them accountable for behavior change afterwards? I'd stamp my feet louder.
Are we throwing a name in the hat, or are we putting someone who's going to be passionate about it? Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's what I'd tell my 10-year self 10 years ago.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
So that's all we have, and that was a lot of information, and we really appreciate it, and looking forward to learning more about buddy aid. But until next time, thank you for coming on the show, ma'am.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Very nice to meet you, Captain.
You as well.
Thanks.
Thank you. If you would like more information on any of the topics that we discussed today, please visit our social media pages in the links below. If you liked today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.